She warned me with fire in her eyes, "You'll regret this." But I only smiled and whispered back, "Only if you stop now." I never thought a single voice could unsettle me the way hers did. Not because she shouted or demanded attention, in fact, it was the opposite. My boss, Elena, carried authority the way some people wear perfume, quietly, invisibly, but it lingered long after she spoke. She was 42, confident in ways that made every room bend toward her. And yet, behind that confidence, there was something else. Something I couldn't name. That afternoon, I sat across from her desk, pretending to be focused on the documents in front of me. The truth? I wasn't reading a word. My eyes kept lifting, drawn to her. The way she leaned back in her chair, pen tapping rhythmically against the polished wood. The way a lock of dark hair fell forward, framing her cheek. She brushed it away once, then again, as though it was fighting her composure. The office smelled faintly of her perfume, something warm, floral, and steady. It clung to the air like a secret. Every time I breathed, it pulled me further into her orbit. I told myself not to notice. She was my boss. She was older, experienced, someone who had seen more of life than I could even grasp. But the more I tried not to notice, the more impossible it became. She looked up suddenly, catching me mid-thought. Her eyes, sharp, steady, almost too steady, met mine. My fingers tightened around the pen I held, and I quickly glanced back at the papers. But the damage was done. My pulse had already betrayed me. "Are you even listening?" she asked softly. Her tone wasn't harsh. It didn't need to be. The calm weight of her voice was enough to cut through every excuse I had lined up. "Yes," I answered too quickly. Too defensive. Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something sharper. She set her pen down and folded her hands, elbows resting on the desk as she studied me. I felt the heat rise in my neck, the silence between us pulling tighter and tighter, until even the hum of the air conditioner felt unbearably loud. I wanted to look away. I should have looked away. But I didn't. And she noticed. For the first time, I thought I saw something flicker in her expression, not irritation, not coldness. Something closer to curiosity. Vulnerability, maybe. It was gone before I could be sure, hidden again behind the smooth mask of professionalism she wore so well. But in that moment, I realized something: her words carried weight because she carried weight. And as much as I wanted to convince myself this was just work, just business, I knew I was already caught in something deeper. Something I wouldn't be able to ignore. The meeting should have been routine. A project update, a few notes, and I'd be out the door. But with Elena, nothing ever stayed routine. She had this way of turning even the simplest conversation into something charged, a test, almost, as if she wanted to see what I was really made of. That day, it started with a disagreement over strategy. I thought her plan was too cautious, too safe. I wanted to take risks, to push forward, to prove myself. She listened, arms crossed, head tilted slightly, her eyes never leaving me. Every nod, every pause felt deliberate, like she was measuring not just my words but my resolve. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "You'll regret this." The words landed heavier than they should have. Not a threat, not even a command, but a warning. And warnings from her were not to be taken lightly. My chest tightened, but not from fear. Instead, I felt a strange steadiness rising inside me. Maybe it was pride, maybe foolishness, or maybe just the way her gaze burned into mine. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Only if you stop now." The silence that followed was unbearable. She blinked once, slowly, as though processing my words. Her fingers, which had been drumming lightly against the desk, froze mid-motion. I could see her breath deepen, her chest rising and falling just slightly faster. Her lips parted as if to reply, but no words came. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing just enough to make me wonder if I had gone too far. But beneath the steel, there was something else. A flicker of surprise. A spark of respect, maybe. The air between us shifted. It was no longer just about a project or a disagreement. It was about something unspoken, something that neither of us dared to name. I sat there, pen in hand, fingers tight around it to steady myself. I didn't move, didn't back down. And for the first time, I saw her hesitate. Just for a heartbeat. But it was enough. She finally spoke, her voice softer now, almost guarded. "You have no idea what you're walking into." Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I didn't want her to stop. Not here. Not now. The argument ended on paper, but in truth, nothing was resolved. We carried on as if things were normal, yet every glance, every pause in conversation carried the weight of what had just happened. That evening, Elena called me back into her office to review some reports. I expected the same sharp tone, the same controlled presence she always wore like armor. But when I stepped inside, I saw something different. She sat at her desk, shoulders slightly slumped, her hand massaging her temple as if the weight of the day had finally caught up to her. For the first time, she looked tired. Human. She noticed me watching and straightened instantly, her back stiffening. The mask returned, but not quickly enough. I had already seen the moment of weakness she hadn't meant to show. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the chair across from her. I obeyed, sliding the chair back slowly, trying to quiet the sudden rush in my chest. As she handed me the file, our fingers brushed. It was a brief touch, no more than a second, but the effect was immediate. My skin burned where it met hers, the heat so sharp that I almost dropped the folder. Her eyes flickered up, and for the briefest moment, her composure cracked again. It wasn't irritation I saw in her gaze. It was awareness. She felt it too. The silence stretched, filled only by the quiet hum of the lamp. I tried to focus on the words in the report, but they blurred together. My attention was fixed on her, the way her breathing had changed, just slightly quicker than before. The way her pen tapped once against the desk and then stopped, her hand curling into a fist as if to steady herself. "Elena," I started, then caught myself. I never called her by her first name at work. Her lips parted, almost in surprise. Then, instead of correcting me, she simply looked down, as though she couldn't risk meeting my eyes. That was the moment I knew the line between us wasn't as solid as I'd believed. She wasn't just the untouchable boss, the woman who commanded respect from everyone in the building. She was also someone who carried her own burdens, who tried to hide the loneliness that lived in the corners of her eyes. And I, foolish, reckless, or maybe just honest, had seen it. By the time the rest of the office emptied, I was still at my desk, finishing numbers that didn't need to be finished. Truth was, I knew she was still there, and some part of me wanted an excuse to stay. The halls were dark, the echo of footsteps long gone, leaving only the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the faint hum of city traffic outside. When I finally gathered the courage to check on her, I found Elena still in her office. The blinds were half drawn, shadows cutting across her desk like quiet secrets. She wasn't working anymore, she was just sitting there, staring at a single page, though her eyes looked far beyond it. She glanced up when I knocked lightly on the doorframe. For once, her expression wasn't guarded. No sharp words, no clipped instructions. Just a small sigh, the kind people let slip when they've forgotten they're not alone. "You're still here," she said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "So are you," I replied, managing a faint smile. Something in her eyes warmed, though she tried to hide it by looking back down at the paper. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and sat across from her. The office felt different now, not the battlefield of power and control it had been earlier, but something gentler, more fragile. For a while, we talked about work. Then, without realizing how, the subject shifted. She mentioned how the position demanded long hours, how the weight of decisions never really left her. And then, almost against her own will, she admitted something else. "It's quieter at home than I'd like," she murmured, her gaze dropping. "Sometimes it feels easier to stay here." I didn't know what to say at first. The woman everyone admired for her strength was showing me the loneliness that trailed behind it. And somehow, I understood. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Her laugh, low, unguarded, broke through when I shared a small story about my own clumsy mistakes during my first weeks at the company. She leaned back, hand covering her mouth as she laughed, eyes glinting in the dim light. For a moment, she wasn't my boss. She was simply a woman, letting herself be seen. The desk lamp cast a soft glow across her face, catching the curve of her smile, the faint tiredness beneath her eyes. I wanted to freeze the moment, to hold on to the rare glimpse of her without walls. And I realized then, the quiet after hours wasn't silence at all. It was an invitation. The hours slipped by without either of us noticing. What began as a casual exchange had deepened into something quieter, more personal. The office, once so full of structure and deadlines, now felt like its own world, tucked away from everything outside. She rose from her chair to grab a folder from the cabinet, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I watched her, not out of disobedience or boldness, but because in that moment, she wasn't the untouchable figure everyone else saw. She was Elena, graceful, human, a little weary, yet impossibly magnetic. When she returned to the desk, a paper slipped from the folder and fluttered toward the ground. Instinctively, I bent down to catch it. At the same moment, she did too. Our hands collided just above the carpet, fingers brushing, palms grazing before either of us could pull away. The touch was nothing, just skin against skin, yet everything inside me stilled. Her hand was warm, delicate, but steady in a way that carried its own kind of strength. She froze too, her eyes locking onto mine in the dim glow of the desk lamp. For a second, neither of us moved. Finally, she drew back, standing with the paper in hand, but her breath was uneven. She placed it on the desk, slower than usual, as though trying to compose herself. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. The air had changed. Something unspoken hovered between us, fragile, dangerous, but undeniable. A little later, she leaned over the desk to show me a note in the report. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder for balance. The warmth of her touch seeped through the thin fabric of my shirt, igniting a current that traveled all the way down my spine. She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I. I tilted my head slightly, just enough to catch the faint scent of her perfume again, subtle, steady, but now mixed with the nearness of her breath. My pulse skipped. I knew this wasn't how things should be, yet every instinct told me not to move, not to break whatever this fragile moment was. When she finally did step back, the room felt emptier without her closeness. I swallowed, gripping the pen in my hand as if it could anchor me. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered a beat too long, betraying what her voice refused to admit. In that silence, the line between us blurred, no longer boss and employee, no longer roles defined by others. Just two people, standing too close, breathing the same unsteady air. The closeness of the night lingered long after she pulled her hand away. I tried to steady myself with work, flipping through reports, pretending to be unaffected. But my chest told the truth, every heartbeat loud, unrestrained, as though it wanted to speak the words I couldn't. She stood by the window now, her back to me, the city lights spilling in through the blinds and outlining her silhouette. She looked untouchable again, framed by glass and darkness, but I knew better. I had seen the cracks. I had felt them in the way her hand lingered on mine, in the hesitation behind her words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried both steel and fragility. "You'll regret this." It wasn't just about the reports or the office anymore. It wasn't even about the invisible lines we had already begun to cross. It was about us. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. I rose slowly, my chair scraping lightly against the floor. She didn't turn, though I saw her shoulders stiffen. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough for her to sense me behind her. Her fingers curled around the edge of the windowsill. She was holding herself together with sheer will. I could hear it in the way her breath faltered. "You'll regret letting this go any further," she whispered again, softer now, almost as if she were pleading with herself more than with me. I swallowed, my throat dry, and let the words escape before I could doubt them. "Only if you stop now." She froze. The stillness that followed was heavier than silence, it was a pause that could change everything. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes searching mine, as if daring me to prove I meant it. Her pen, the one she had been holding absent-mindedly, slipped from her fingers and clattered against the desk. She didn't move to pick it up. Instead, her gaze stayed locked on me, unwavering, burning with something between fear and desire. I didn't reach for her. I didn't have to. The tension stretched like a drawn bow, every second alive with possibility. My chest rose and fell, and I knew she could hear the uneven rhythm of my breathing, just as I could hear hers. For the first time, her voice failed her. She didn't argue. She didn't retreat. She simply stood there, caught between authority and surrender, knowing the walls she had built were no longer unshakable. And I knew then, what bound us wasn't just attraction. It was choice. The silence between us felt endless. The kind of silence that could either shatter everything or build something new. Elena stood just a few steps away, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her breath steadying as though she was bracing for whatever came next. Her eyes softened first. The sharp edges of authority, the guarded mask she always wore, they slipped away, leaving something far more vulnerable. A quiet smile tugged at the corners of her lips, hesitant but real, and in that single expression, I knew we had crossed into uncharted territory. "I shouldn't," she whispered, almost to herself. Her gaze drifted to the desk, to the papers scattered between us, as if reminding herself of the roles we were supposed to play. But when her eyes lifted back to mine, she didn't step away. She stepped closer. Her hand brushed against my sleeve, light at first, almost accidental. But it lingered. That single touch carried more weight than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't commanding, wasn't testing. It was a choice, hers. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Slowly, I turned my hand just enough so my fingers grazed hers. She didn't pull away. The warmth of her skin seeped into me, steadying the storm in my chest. Neither of us spoke. Words felt too fragile for what was unfolding. Instead, there was a stillness, a mutual understanding that whatever came after this moment wouldn't be regret. It would be truth. For the first time, she allowed herself to simply be, not the boss, not the untouchable figure everyone admired, but a woman who wanted to be seen. And I, standing there in the quiet glow of her office, felt the gravity of it all, the risk, the uncertainty, the undeniable pull between us. When she finally did speak, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "This doesn't have to be a mistake." I nodded, the words settling deep in me. "Then let's not treat it like one." Her shoulders eased, the tension melting into something almost tender. She gave me a small, knowing look, the kind that didn't promise forever, but promised something just as powerful, honesty. As I walked out of her office later that night, the city lights glowing in the distance, I carried with me not the fear of regret, but the certainty of a beginning. A fragile, complicated, beautiful beginning.